And remember, friends, future events such as these may affect you in the future. I have no idea what that sentence means. I've just always wanted to say it on camera because I'm a big fan of Plan 9 from Outer Space. Welcome back to yet another episode of Round the Clock Frights. I am Josh. Now today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. As some of you may know, we usually do horror movie reviews on this channel, but every now and then we'll dive into something a little bit different. We've talked about television shows before. We've talked about Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, things that may have scared us in our youth. We've talked about books. We've talked about other TV shows. But today, I'm going to bring out my dark side, and I'm going to talk about an anime that I really liked.
You are such a nerd.
Now, for those who don't know, I am an enormous fan of anime. I was a little bit late to the art. My girlfriend at the time was actually the one who introduced me to anime. We watched a lot of really awesome shows together. She showed me titles such as Sword Art Online, aka The Rape Show. She also showed me Fullmetal Alchemist, aka the one where a little girl gets spliced with her pet dog and things just get really, really disturbing. But I have been a huge fan of anime ever since I met my girlfriend in high school, and I've seen many shows. I've watched some of the classics like Akira. Akira is a fantastic science fiction movie, but there is one title that I had been wanting to check out for a while, Satoshi Kon's Perfect Blue. Now, this was a film that was originally released in 1997. It did get an American release in 1999, and it did receive generally positive reviews. American audiences did take to it quite well. In fact, one of the most critically acclaimed directors nowadays, Darren Aronofsky, he actually bought the American rights, the American distribution rights to Perfect Blue, because he wanted to recreate one of the sequences in one of his own films, Requiem for a Dream. But I will admit, it's not an enormously popular movie. This isn't something like Akira or, something like that. You don't usually see it pop up in film books or, when people talk about some of the greatest anime movies of all time. This doesn't usually come up in conversation. Now, how did I come across Perfect Blue? I was actually looking on the internet, and I've been wanting to watch more horror anime for a while. Now, I've tried watching some horror TV series. I tried watching High School of the Dead. That show I didn't really have a problem with how gruesome it was. I didn't really care about any of the characters, and I just didn't think it was particularly well made. I just didn't latch onto it. I tried watching Hellsing, which is a show that actually did catch my attention, and I want to continue it at some point. However, Perfect Blue is a movie that popped up in my search, and it sounded very intriguing. Now, some may not classify this as a quote-unquote horror movie. Some describe it as more of a psychological thriller, which I completely understand, but here's the thing. If a movie is able to horrify me overall, and I'm not just talking about one or two sequences, if a movie is able to legitimately get under my skin and unnerve me in a tremendous way, I usually classify it as a horror movie. I've done that with titles like Seven, The Silence of the Lambs. Most people describe those as thrillers, but point being, I do consider Perfect Blue a horror movie because there are some truly unnerving scenes in this movie, and there are some truly violent and disturbing sequences in this movie, and I have to admit, overall, I dug the hell out of this movie.
Mima was a pop star.
This is Mima's last performance with Cham.
Who desired to become an actress.
I really hope that I can entertain you just the same as an actress.
But sometimes aspirations can be deadly.
I'm always watching Mima's room.
In the world of make-believe.
This is when Mima proves herself.
But before we get into all that, let me describe the general premise of this movie. It's about this young pop idol named Mima. She's been the member of a pop band called Cham for over 20 years, and she decides that she wants to change her image up a bit. She wants to go into acting. Now, right away, I just have to say right off the bat that I was getting some Hannah Montana vibes, but okay, this movie came out like 6 years before Hannah Montana, 6 to 10 years, so that's a little bit unfair of me. But anyway, so Mima wants to change her life and she wants to become an actress. At the beginning of the movie, we see her perform on a stage in front of an adoring crowd, and the crowd is disappointed that she is leaving the band, but she has to pursue a career that she is happy with. She is pretty much done with her pop idol days. She wants to leave all that behind her, and this movie does an amazing job of showing just how stressful the life of an artist can be, because this woman is like being harassed. She is having people scream at her. You know, we've seen many movies that depict the overall stressful lifestyle of an artist, but this movie does it incredibly well. But at this performance, there is a man in the audience who turns out to be an immense stalker. During her performance, a gang of rowdy teenagers are throwing items at her, but he actually intervenes. He actually gets very violent whenever somebody insults Mima. And we see on numerous occasions that this is a very unhinged individual. And as far as red herrings, this movie doesn't really have any. It leads us to believe that this man, this stalker, is the killer. He has actually created a website dedicated to Mima called Mima's Room. Now, this was in the very, very early days of the internet, where people were still getting, familiar with it, and many people didn't even know how to browse the web. And it was a little bit amusing watching Mima learn about the internet. Like, she purchases this old Apple computer, and she's trying to figure out how to use it, and she's just so amazed by this new technology, and that did get some chuckles out of me. But anyway, the stalker has created this website where he's essentially describing what she does like all day, like just the tiniest detail. Like, he talks about how she steps off of a train with her right foot, and right away we just become incredibly unnerved. And the rest of the movie is pretty much her trying to jumpstart her career as an actress. But things happen. She gets a very small role in a cop drama series in which she only has one line, and she is trying to get bigger parts. She wants roles that will allow her to fully emerge as a new actress, but it's very difficult because this is the industry that isn't very kind to newcomers, and people still see her as a pop idol. And I just have to say, this movie, you really do sympathize with Mima. She is a very sweet girl, and she is a little bit naive. She is a little bit oblivious to the fact that people are trying to control her life. Her female manager isn't necessarily comfortable with the idea of her becoming an actress. She kind of wants her to remain as a pop idol, and her other manager wants her to move forward as an actress. So she isn't really in control of things. So we do sympathize with her quite a bit. But the movie becomes incredibly unnerving because we see this psycho stalker become very violent. There's a sequence straight out of a slasher movie where he actually tracks down the screenwriter of this TV series that Mima is in, and he brutally murders him inside an elevator. We actually hear one of Mima's old pop songs kind of echoing throughout the room, and it is just so scary, and it's honestly something that either Wes Craven or John Carpenter would have dreamt up. And again, I do classify this movie as being a part of the horror genre. There are scary sequences like this. There's another scene where a photographer is visited by a pizza delivery boy, but it turns out that this pizza delivery boy is actually Mima in disguise, and she ends up stabbing him repeatedly with a screwdriver, and you're just cringing in your seat. This movie is beautifully animated, by the way. I love the design of the characters, and something Satoshi Kon does incredibly well. Characters who are creepy or are antagonistic, he does a very good job of making them look very creepy and antagonistic. Like the stalker in this movie, his face is a little bit deformed, like his teeth are just kind of, just not aligned, and I love the character design in this movie. I would say my favorite sequence, though, there's a sequence where Mima's old pop group is performing on stage again, but there's only two of them. And a stalker is there. He is watching them obsessively in the crowd, but he's not focused on the two of them. He's actually imagining Mima at the performance. And there's this wonderful moment where we see the two members of the pop band on stage. There's like this gap between them, and the stalker kind of sees the ghost of Mima up on the stage. And there's a number of really just eerie sequences like that.
Where did this come from? How do they know so much?
Innocence is lost. Dreams become nightmares. And privacy no longer exists. Where everything you do can be seen by everyone. And those you trust are really those you should fear.
This movie doesn't pull any punches. In fact, this is a brutal movie. There is some hardcore nudity in this film. The photographer that I mentioned earlier, he encourages her to strip in front of the camera, and they show everything. She bears all, and this goes back to the idea that this woman is being taken control of. She's being manipulated, she's being exploited, and we just feel so sorry for her. And at the end, when she comes into her own and she becomes much more confident, we are rooting for her. Now, I don't want to jump too far ahead because there are some other things that I really want to talk about. This movie is also kind of a mindfuck. It must have influenced numerous filmmakers afterward. There are sequences where you are really beginning to question the reality of things, whether or not these things are actually happening. There will be several supposed dream sequences in which she will wake up in bed and you're not entirely sure of what happened earlier even happened at all. This movie does an incredible job of just making you question things, and it's one of those movies where you aren't given all the answers. Some things are left ambiguous, and you kind of have to put some of the pieces together, and I love movies that do that. A modern day equivalent would be something like Inception, or maybe not Inception. Let me think of a better example. Maybe something like Darren Aronofsky's The Fountain, where just something that is very trippy and might be hard to figure out at first, but when you go back and rewatch something like Perfect Blue, you can see certain hints. You can see certain hints in earlier scenes. And now we can talk about the climax of this movie. Now, people have compared the style of this movie to someone like Stanley Kubrick, and I can see that, but there's another director I had in mind while watching this movie. The great Italian filmmaker Dario Argento. He is a man who pretty much made a career off of making crime mysteries, and when the killer is revealed in this movie, I was reminded of the Dario Argento movie Deep Red, because in Deep Red, the ultimate reveal of the killer is not something you would have expected. Argento took this seemingly meaningless character and made them the central antagonist, and the killer in this movie isn't meaningless because, spoilers as it turns out, Mima's female manager Rumi is the one behind all of this. Rumi has been obsessed with Mima for a very, very long time, and she has actually become so insane that she has stolen some of Mima's old wardrobe, and she's actually taken it for herself. Near the end of the movie, Mima is in her apartment, and her insane manager is wearing some of her old pop clothes, and Satoshi Kon does this really clever thing where at times we'll just see the ghost of Mima, like Mima will be fighting herself, and obviously he's trying to allude to the fact that she is at war with herself. She's fighting her own inner demons, which I just thought was brilliant. I thought that was a brilliant idea. We get a thrilling chase sequence through the streets where Nina is being, or not Nina, I keep saying Nina. I got Fullmetal Alchemist on the brain. The Nina Tucker storyline. Disturbing as hell. Mima is being chased through the streets by Rumi, her old manager, and it ends up being a very bloody climax because, I forgot to mention, earlier in the movie, Mima has a vision of herself being run over by a truck. At the end of the movie, she actually saves her manager from being run over by a truck. So it kind of shows that Mima is more in control of her own destiny. Like, she is finally ready to assert herself and she is ready to live her own life. The killer that had been front and center this entire movie has also been slaughtered. Mima stood up to him, and there's actually a really satisfying moment where the killer is about to rape her. He actually rips off her underwear, he pulls down his pants, but she actually fights back. And at the end of the movie, Mima is in control of her own life, and her manager is sent to the psych ward, and at first I did think the climax let Mima off a little bit too easily. I was expecting something a little bit more unfair at the end, but it turns out Mima is fine. She's ready to lead her own life. She's fully confident with herself, which kind of ties into the title of the movie. I was wondering where the title Perfect Blue came from, and I have a theory about that. I think it has to do with the clear sky at the end, because much of the movie, the atmosphere is just gloomy and miserable. We don't really see a clear blue sky, but at the end, when things are finally working out for her, we do see a clear blue sky. So that's where I think the title came from. I might be completely wrong about that, so don't hold me to it. That's just a fun theory that I came up with. But anyway, that is Perfect Blue, and we have seen movies like this before. I mean, there have been so many movies about an upcoming actress who will do anything to basically, make it big. There was a movie that came out a few years ago called Starry Eyes, about a young woman who is willing to join this satanic cult in order to become a big Hollywood actress. There was another movie directed by Darren Aronofsky called Black Swan, starring Natalie Portman, and Natalie Portman actually goes to some very violent lengths to become a world-renowned ballet dancer. So we've seen this kind of premise before, but there is one thing that I liked about Perfect Blue in particular, something that kind of separated it from those other movies. I thought this was very clever. So as I mentioned, Mima is kind of haunted by a version of herself, almost a ghost. But she isn't the only one being haunted by this. Her stalker is also being haunted by this ghost of Mima. So I thought that was a very unique take on this kind of premise. Just the idea that not only is our main protagonist being haunted by herself, but her antagonists are as well. So that set it apart from other psychological thrillers such as Black Swan and something along those lines. But overall, I thought Perfect Blue was a very, very good movie. It did get under my skin, and it was really ahead of its time. Like I mentioned earlier, the killer creates this website dedicated to Mima, and we see that so often nowadays. There are so many websites that are dedicated to celebrities, talking about how amazing they are, or sometimes you'll stumble across a website that goes into a little bit too much detail about a celebrity, and this movie commented on all of that. And this was made in 1997, decades before social media existed. So I must give it props for that. If you haven't seen Perfect Blue, I highly recommend it. I personally rented it on Amazon. It cost about $4, which I was okay with. Although, funny story, this is actually kind of embarrassing. When I first rented the movie, I accidentally rented the dub. I could only watch the first 2 minutes of the dub because the dub was so freaking god awful. The English actors were terrible. They were making me cringe, and I just had to pause, and I had to find the sub version because I just couldn't. I'm so thankful that I was able to track down the original version because it was worth it. Like I said, Perfect Blue is kind of an underrated masterpiece.
Your life no longer belongs to you.
Excuse me, who are you?
Manga Entertainment presents Satoshi Kon's animated psychological thriller, Perfect Blue.
Excuse me, who are you? Excuse me, who are you?
But I'm putting my foot down and I'm telling you to go watch more anime. Something like Fullmetal Alchemist, My Hero Academia, or something really scary like Boku no Pico, which is really scary. Actually, no, don't look at that. Don't look at that at all. Please just avoid that at all costs. Please do not do that to yourselves. My wife was actually the one who showed me Boku no Pico, and I don't know why she would ever do that. She has kind of a sick sense of humor. Anyway, guys, thank you again. Perfect Blue, really good film. Now, as far as what we're going to do next, we are still in the middle of a quarantine, so we've kind of been throwing around ideas. I want to review the Wes Craven movie Shocker, another one of his underrated flicks. One of my older videos, I talked about the 2005 movie Red Eye, which I find to be another really underrated Wes Craven movie. So Shocker, I might be doing a review of that very soon. But as always, if you like this, go ahead and subscribe to our channel Round the Clock Frights. And thank you so much again for joining me, and have a very scary day. But also stay safe out there. And whatever you do, don't research the word hentai either, because that will also haunt your nightmares, and I just gave you some really bad ideas. So guys, have a good night. Stay safe.